My name is Margaret Hartwell. I'm 54 years old. And this Christmas morning, I stood in my kitchen wearing a threadbare apron, the smell of cinnamon rolls filling the air, as my son Derek stormed through the door with eviction papers clutched in his fist. He slammed them onto the counter so hard the sugar bowl rattled, his face twisted with contempt as he screamed words that echoed off the walls. "Pay the rent or get out. This is my house now." My hands trembled as I set down the wooden spoon. And for the first time in 2 years of his abuse, I looked him straight in the eye and said something that made every drop of color drain from his face. "I know about the offshore account, Derek. Before we dive into how I got here and what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. If this story resonates with you or someone you know, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of survival and strength. Trust me, you won't believe what I discovered about my own son, and what I did about it will shock you even more. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare truly began. 6 years before that frozen Christmas morning, my life looked completely different. I was a single mother who had raised Derek alone after my husband Thomas died in a construction accident when Derek was only 8 years old. Thomas had been the love of my life, a hard-working man who always put his family first, and losing him shattered our world into a million pieces. But I refused to let grief destroy us, so I picked up those pieces and built something new. I worked double shifts as a registered nurse at County General Hospital, my feet aching and my back screaming. But I never complained because every hour meant Derek could have a better future. I put him through college on my salary and the modest settlement we received from Thomas' employer, watching with pride as he walked across that stage with a business degree from State University. Derek graduated with honors and immediately landed a job at Morrison Financial Group, a prestigious firm downtown. I remember the day he got the offer, how he called me from his dorm room, his voice crackling with excitement, telling me that all my sacrifices had been worth it. I cried tears of joy that night, looking at Thomas' photo on my nightstand, whispering that our boy had made it. But something shifted in Derek during those early years at the firm. He became obsessed with wealth, with status, with climbing higher and higher on a ladder I couldn't even see. When he married his college girlfriend Bethany 4 years ago, I should have seen the warning signs. Bethany came from old money, the kind of family that summered in the Hamptons and wintered in Aspen, and she looked at my humble lifestyle with barely concealed disgust. At their wedding, held at her parents' country club, I felt like an outsider in my discount store dress, while everyone else glittered in designer labels. By the time I turned 48, my body had given everything it could to nursing. Chronic back pain from years of lifting patients and standing for 12-hour shifts made it impossible to continue, so I took early retirement with a small pension and my Social Security. I used my savings and what remained of Thomas' settlement to buy a modest 2-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Illinois. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, a place where I could finally rest and maybe plant a garden like I had always dreamed. I painted the walls myself, hung curtains I sewed by hand, and filled it with memories of Derek's childhood. Photos of him and Thomas, little trinkets from happier times. It was my sanctuary, my reward for decades of hard work and sacrifice. The change in Derek became impossible to ignore after his marriage. He started distancing himself from me, making excuses why he couldn't visit, claiming my neighborhood embarrassed him in front of Bethany's friends. When I invited them for Sunday dinners, the tradition Thomas and I had maintained religiously, Bethany would wrinkle her nose at my pot roast and make comments about simple food for simple people. Derek would laugh along with her jokes, and each laugh felt like a knife between my ribs. I told myself he was just trying to fit into her world, that underneath he was still my sweet boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them roses. I was so desperate to believe that lie. 2 years ago, everything changed forever. Derek came to visit alone, which was rare, and he seemed nervous, fidgeting with his coffee cup at my kitchen table. He started talking about estate planning, about how important it was to avoid probate, using words like beneficiary designation and transfer on death that made my head spin. Then he suggested adding his name to my house deed, claiming it would protect me, make things easier when I got older, ensure the house stayed in the family. He made it sound so reasonable, so caring, like he was finally stepping up as a son should. I was so grateful for his attention, so starved for his affection, that I signed the papers without reading them carefully. My own lawyer had retired, And Derek said his firm had lawyers who handled this all the time. I trusted him completely because he was my son, my baby, the child I had sacrificed everything for. 6 months after I signed those papers, Derek showed up at my door with a rental agreement in hand and a coldness in his eyes I had never seen before. He announced that he was now co-owner of the property and that I needed to start paying him rent, $500 a month. I stood there in shock, my mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, trying to process what he was saying. When I protested, when I said this was my house that I bought with my own money, he pulled out the deed showing both our names and explained in a patronizing tone that I was now living in his investment property. He twisted everything, saying I had agreed to this arrangement, that I was getting old and confused, that he was doing me a favor by letting me stay at such a low rate. I felt like I was losing my mind, questioning my own memory, wondering if somehow I had misunderstood everything. The financial trap tightened around my throat slowly, methodically, like a noose. Derek gradually increased the rent over the next year, from $500 to $700 to $900, and finally to $1,200 a month. My Social Security check was $1,300, and my small pension added another $400, leaving me with exactly $500 for food, utilities, medication, and everything else. I started skipping meals, eating canned soup and stale bread. I turned off the heat in winter, piling on blankets and wearing Thomas' old coat indoors. I took on odd jobs, cleaning houses for neighbors, babysitting, anything to scrape together enough to pay my son the rent he demanded for my own home. Every time Derek came by, which was only when rent was due, he would criticize something. The lawn needed mowing, the paint was chipping, the curtains looked shabby, my cooking was bland, my clothes were outdated. I was letting myself go. He made me feel worthless, like a burden, like I was lucky he allowed me to exist in this space. Bethany was pregnant with their second child, and Derek said he needed the money for his growing family, that I was selfish for not contributing more. The emotional manipulation was so constant, so insidious, that I started believing maybe I was wrong, maybe I did owe him, maybe I was just a confused old woman who should be grateful for his generosity. I became a ghost in my own home, jumping every time the phone rang in case it was Derek with another demand. I stopped seeing friends because I was ashamed. I stopped going to church because I couldn't afford the donation basket. I stopped living and started just surviving, shrinking smaller and smaller until I barely recognized myself in the mirror. The vibrant nurse who had once commanded respect from doctors and saved lives now cowered in her own kitchen, afraid of her own son. 3 months before that devastating Christmas morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a brusque male voice identified himself as a collections agent from National Credit Services, demanding payment for $15,000 owed on a credit card account in my name. My heart stopped. I told him there must be a mistake, that I hadn't opened any credit card, that I only had one card with a $300 limit that I rarely used. He rattled off an account number, opening date, and a list of charges that made my head spin. Jewelry purchases at Tiffany's, dinners at restaurants I couldn't pronounce, luxury goods from stores I had never even walked past. I felt sick, dizzy, gripping the kitchen counter to stay upright as he demanded to know when I would pay. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for an hour, staring at nothing, trying to understand what was happening. Identity theft? It had to be identity theft. I had heard stories on the news about criminals stealing people's information and ruining their credit. Terrified and confused, I called Derek, my voice shaking as I explained what the collector had said. To my surprise, Derek came over that same evening, and for the first time in months, he seemed concerned about me. He put his arm around my shoulders, told me not to worry, said we would figure this out together. That small gesture of kindness from my son made me cry with relief because I had missed him so desperately. Missed the boy who used to hug me and tell me I was the best mom in the world. Derek drove me to the bank the next morning, holding my elbow as we walked in like I was fragile, speaking to the bank manager in authoritative tones about fraud and victim protection. The manager pulled up my credit report on her computer screen, and as she scrolled through it, her expression grew more and more concerned. She printed out statements showing the fraudulent credit card transactions. A diamond bracelet for $4,000, dinners totaling hundreds of dollars each, designer handbags, expensive electronics. The signatures on the applications looked like mine, but something was off. the loops slightly different, the pressure uneven. I stared at those signatures, my brain screaming that something was wrong. But Derek kept saying I probably forgot, that stress and age do things to memory, that it was understandable. Derek offered to handle everything for me. To contact the credit card company, to file fraud reports, to take care of it so I wouldn't have to worry. He was so convincing, so seemingly helpful, that I almost believed him. But late that night, alone in my house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I went through my files and found the copies of the statements the bank had given me, studying them under my lamp, looking at the signatures again and again. The handwriting looked like someone had practiced my signature, someone who knew how I wrote but couldn't quite get it perfect. A cold suspicion began to form in my gut. But I pushed it away because suspecting Derek felt like betraying my own heart. Against every instinct telling me not to, I went to the public library the following week and asked the librarian to help me check my credit report online. She was a kind woman named Helen who showed me how to access the free annual report, and what I saw on that screen made my blood run cold. There were 3 credit cards I had never opened, plus a personal loan for $18,000, all in my name, all with balances totaling $43,000. Every single account had been opened within the last 18 months, right after Derek's name went on my house deed. The billing addresses were my house, but the email addresses were generic ones I didn't recognize. MG Hartwell 1987 at some free email service, Margaret H. Home at another. I sat there in the library, my hands trembling so badly I could barely write down the information, feeling like the floor was opening up beneath me. I knew I needed to confront Derek, but I was terrified. Still, I gathered my courage and brought it up during his next visit when he came to collect rent. I spoke carefully, softly, saying there seemed to be more accounts than we thought, that maybe we should file a police report about the identity theft. Derek's face transformed in an instant. The mask of concern shattered, replaced by cold fury that made me take a step backward. He exploded, slamming his fist on my table, accusing me of being paranoid and ungrateful, saying he had wasted his time trying to help me when I clearly didn't appreciate it. He said I was losing my mind, that I probably opened those accounts during some confused episode and forgot about it, that I was becoming a burden on everyone around me. His words were like acid, burning away what little confidence I had left. He stormed out of my house, and for 2 weeks afterward, he refused to answer my calls or respond to my messages, punishing me with silence. Then one afternoon, I ran into Bethany at the grocery store, purely by accident. I was in the discount aisle, calculating whether I could afford both toilet paper and laundry detergent that week, when I heard her voice behind me. She was at the jewelry counter near the front, returning something, and I heard the clerk mention the designer name. When she turned and saw me, her expression flickered with something that looked almost like guilt before hardening into contempt. I noticed immediately the diamond bracelet on her wrist, catching the fluorescent lights, clearly expensive, stunning really. She saw me looking at it and actually smiled, a cold, calculated smile that sent chills down my spine. Bethany walked over to me, and in a voice just loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear, she told me to stay out of Derek's business. She said Derek deserved nice things after supporting his mother for so long, after dealing with my constant needs and complaints, after being burdened with my care. Each word was chosen carefully to humiliate me publicly, to paint me as the problem. Then she held up her wrist, letting that bracelet catch the light, and I saw the designer name etched into the clasp, the same designer name that had been on one of the charges on my fraudulent credit card statement, the same purchase amount of $4,000. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My own son had stolen my identity, destroyed my credit, bought his wife jewelry with stolen money, and was now gaslighting me into thinking I was crazy. I somehow made it home that day, my grocery basket abandoned in the store, and I collapsed on my kitchen floor and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. But even then, even with the evidence literally sparkling on Bethany's wrist, part of me still couldn't believe Derek would do this. I loved him so desperately, so completely, that accepting his betrayal felt like accepting my own death. I started having panic attacks, waking up in the middle of the night unable to breathe, my heart racing, convinced I was having a heart attack. I lost 20 pounds over the next month because food tasted like ash in my mouth. But through all of it, through the grief and terror and confusion, I kept gathering evidence quietly, taking photos, making notes, because somewhere deep inside, I knew I needed to survive this. 2 months before that Christmas confrontation, I found myself standing in line at the community center food pantry, holding a reusable grocery bag and trying to make myself invisible. The shame was overwhelming. The feeling that I had failed at being a self-sufficient adult, that I had somehow deserved this fall from grace. I kept my head down, avoiding eye contact with the volunteers, praying I wouldn't see anyone I knew. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years, warm and familiar, calling my name with genuine surprise and concern. I looked up to see Ruth Coleman, a former nursing colleague who had retired from County General around the same time I did. Ruth was 67 now, her hair completely silver, but her eyes were as sharp and kind as I remembered. Ruth took one look at me and her expression shifted from surprise to alarm. She could see how much weight I had lost, the dark circles under my eyes, the way my clothes hung off my frame. Without asking permission, she took my arm and guided me out of the line, telling me we were going for coffee right now. No arguments. We ended up at a cheap diner 2 blocks away, sitting in a cracked vinyl booth with weak coffee and stained mugs. And something about being with Ruth, someone who had known me when I was strong and capable, made the dam break. I told her everything, the words pouring out in a jumbled rush, about Derek adding his name to the deed, the escalating rent, the fraudulent credit cards, the offshore account I had discovered through more research at the library, Bethany's bracelet, my own confusion about what was real. I spread out the credit card statements and rental agreements on the sticky diner table, my hands shaking, expecting Ruth to tell me I was overreacting or confused, just like Derek said. Instead, Ruth listened without interruption, studying the documents with a focused intensity. When I finished talking, she reached across the table and gripped my hand hard enough to hurt. And she said 3 words that changed everything. "This is abuse." She said it wasn't just abuse, it was financial elder abuse, a specific crime that was more common than people realized, where family members exploited older relatives for financial gain. She said I wasn't stupid or crazy or confused. I was a victim of a calculated crime perpetrated by someone I trusted completely. Ruth told me her own story then, something she had never shared during our years working together. Her own son had financially exploited her after her husband died, stealing over $60,000 before she discovered it and fought back. She had been too ashamed to tell anyone at the time, but she had learned hard lessons about manipulation, gaslighting, and the unique pain of being betrayed by your own child. She said the shame was part of how they controlled you, making you feel like you had somehow caused it, like you deserved it. Hearing that I wasn't alone, that someone I respected had survived something similar, gave me the first spark of hope I had felt in months. Ruth had a friend, an attorney named Patricia Monroe, who specialized in elder abuse cases and did pro bono work for victims who couldn't afford representation. Ruth called Patricia right there from the diner, speaking in urgent tones, and Patricia agreed to meet with us that same week. Over the next 3 weeks, I met with Patricia 5 times, bringing every document I could find. The original deed to my house, the modified deed with Derek's name, bank statements, credit card statements, emails, text messages, everything. Patricia was in her early 50s, with gray streaked hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and she radiated competence and controlled anger at what had been done to me. She studied everything with a legal pad in front of her, making notes, asking sharp questions that made me think about details I hadn't considered. At our final meeting, Patricia laid out the truth in blunt terms that left me reeling. Derek had forged my signature on multiple documents, which was felony fraud. He had committed identity theft by opening credit cards and a loan in my name without permission. He had created an offshore account in the Cayman Islands where he had funneled the stolen money, which elevated the charges to wire fraud and money laundering. The house deed had been changed through fraudulent notarization. The notary's signature was fake, which meant I was still the sole legal owner. Every dollar of rent I had paid him was obtained through fraud and intimidation. This wasn't a family dispute or a misunderstanding. This was a crime that could send Derek to prison for 3 to 7 years. Patricia outlined a strategy that required patience and secrecy. We couldn't confront Derek yet because he would destroy evidence and flee. We needed to gather more proof, get handwriting analysis done on the forged signatures, document every threat and payment, freeze the fraudulent accounts, and prepare airtight legal paperwork. Patricia filed preliminary reports with the credit bureaus and fraud divisions, but the criminal charges would wait until we had everything perfect. She warned me that this would be painful, that prosecuting my own son would tear apart whatever remained of our relationship, but she also told me that what Derek had done to me was a choice he made, and the consequences were his responsibility, not mine. For the first time in 2 years, I felt something other than fear and confusion. I felt angry, righteously angry, at being treated like I was worthless by the child I had given my whole life to. I felt clear-headed, like fog was lifting from my brain, allowing me to see the manipulation tactics Derek had used. Ruth gave me books about narcissistic abuse and financial exploitation, and I read them cover to cover, seeing Derek's behavior described with clinical precision on every page. I realized I wasn't losing my mind. I had been systematically gaslit by someone who knew exactly how to break me down. Ruth taught me to trust my own memory and judgment again, to recognize that my feelings of wrongness were valid, that my confusion was an intentional creation of my abuser, not a flaw in my perception. Patricia worked with a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes, and together they built a case that was devastating in its thoroughness. They found every transaction Derek had made with my stolen identity, traced the money flow to his offshore account, documented his purchase of luxury goods for himself and Bethany while I starved. They discovered Derek had also stolen the remainder of Thomas' life insurance payout that I had been keeping for emergencies. Money I thought was safely in an account only I could access, but Derek had gained access when he was added to the house deed and various other documents. The total amount Derek had stolen wasn't just the $43,000 in fraudulent debt. It was over $90,000 when everything was calculated. The transformation in me was gradual, but profound. Ruth stayed with me many evenings, refusing to let me sit alone with my grief and anger. She reminded me constantly of who I really was. A woman who had worked 2 jobs to raise a child alone. A nurse who had saved lives and comforted the dying. A person of value and dignity who deserved respect. She helped me see that Derek's actions reflected his character, not mine. That I had been a good mother and his choices to betray me were not my fault. For the first time since Derek had started his abuse, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my grief for the son I thought I had, mourning him as if he had died, because in a way, he had. The boy who brought me dandelions was gone, replaced by a stranger who saw me only as a resource to exploit. 6 weeks before Christmas, when I was finally starting to feel some strength returning, my phone rang with a name on the caller ID that made my heart leap with desperate hope. Pamela. Derek's younger sister. Pamela was 28. My baby girl. The child I had after Derek. The one I thought was different. While Derek had always been ambitious and driven, Pamela had seemed softer, more empathetic, choosing marketing over finance, living in a modest apartment in downtown Chicago, maintaining more regular contact with me, even if it was just texts and occasional calls. When I saw her name, I felt a surge of relief because surely Pamela would be on my side. Surely one of my children still loved me enough to see what Derek was doing was wrong. Pamela's voice on the phone was warm and concerned, everything I desperately needed to hear. She said she had noticed Derek was stressed and that something was wrong with our relationship, and she wanted to help fix it. She said family was everything, that we needed to work this out, that she couldn't stand seeing us torn apart. She asked if she could come visit, bring some food, talk through what was happening. I agreed immediately, tears streaming down my face with gratitude that at least one of my children still cared. I cleaned my house frantically before she arrived, wanting her to see I was taking care of myself, that I wasn't the confused old woman Derek claimed I was becoming. Pamela arrived on a Saturday afternoon with a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite, and Chinese takeout from the restaurant we used to go to when she was in high school. She hugged me tightly, and I breathed in her perfume, the same floral scent she had worn since college, and felt safer than I had in months. We sat at my kitchen table, eating lo mein and spring rolls, and she listened as I explained what Derek had done. She seemed shocked, horrified, saying she had no idea things had gotten so bad. She apologized for Derek's behavior, calling him stressed and stupid but not malicious, suggesting he had gotten in over his head financially and made bad choices. She made it sound like a mistake rather than a calculated crime, but I was so grateful for any acknowledgement of wrongdoing that I didn't push back. Then Pamela did something that seemed helpful in the moment, but would prove to be devastating. She asked to see all my financial documents so she could better understand the situation and mediate between Derek and me. She said if she knew exactly what had happened, she could talk to Derek, make him see reason, maybe work out a repayment plan that would avoid legal trouble. Her explanation made sense. Her tone was loving and concerned, and I was so desperate for family support that I showed her everything. The credit card statements, the fraudulent deed changes, the rental agreements, even Patricia's legal notes outlining our strategy. I watched Pamela take photos of some documents with her phone, claiming she needed them to talk to Derek properly, to show him the seriousness of the situation, and I thanked her for being so thorough and caring. When Pamela went to the bathroom, I felt hopeful for the first time about my family. Maybe this could be fixed without destroying everything. Maybe Pamela could reach Derek in a way I couldn't. Maybe I wouldn't have to prosecute my own son after all. I was setting out tea and cookies when Pamela came back, and we talked for another hour about potential solutions, about family therapy, about Derek's stress at work, about Bethany's difficult pregnancy. Pamela made everything sound manageable, fixable, like a problem that could be solved with communication and love. When she left that evening, hugging me goodbye and promising to talk to Derek immediately, I actually smiled for the first time in weeks. 2 days later, my phone exploded with Derek's rage. He called me at 7 in the morning, his voice so loud and furious that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. He knew everything, every detail of Patricia's legal strategy, every piece of evidence we had gathered, every plan we had made. He screamed that I was trying to destroy him, that I was an ungrateful witch who wanted to see her own son in prison, that I was insane if I thought I could take him on legally. He threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent, to put me in a nursing home, to make sure I never saw my grandchildren again. Then he told me my rent was now $1,800 a month, due immediately. And if I didn't pay within a week, he would start formal eviction proceedings. The call ended with him saying, "You're going to regret going to war with me, Mother," and then silence. I sat on my couch in shock, my phone still in my hand, trying to understand how Derek knew. Patricia had warned me not to tell anyone, to keep everything confidential, but I had only told one person, Pamela. The realization crept over me slowly, like ice water in my veins, turning my hope into horror. I called Pamela with shaking hands, and when she answered, I asked her directly if she had told Derek about the lawyer and the evidence. There was a pause, just a moment of silence that told me everything. And then Pamela's voice came back different, colder, stripped of the warmth she had shown days earlier. She didn't even bother to deny it. Pamela said, with a casual cruelty that stole my breath, that family sticks together and I wasn't family anymore. She said Derek was her brother, her real family. And I was just a bitter old woman trying to ruin his life because I couldn't accept that he had grown beyond me. She revealed that she had benefited from Derek's fraud too, that Derek had bought her car using one of my fraudulent credit cards, a Honda Accord she had been driving for a year. She justified it by saying I owed them for all the years they had to deal with my depression after Thomas died, for being a burden during their childhoods, for not being wealthy enough to give them the advantages their friends had. Every word was a knife twisting in my chest, each accusation more absurd and painful than the last. I tried to reason with her, reminding her of the sacrifices I had made, the double shifts, the missed sleep, the times I went without so they could have what they needed. Pamela laughed, actually laughed, and said I was playing the martyr, that every mother works hard and I wasn't special. She said Derek had promised to help her start her own marketing firm if she helped him handle me, and that her loyalty was to her future, not to someone stuck in the past. She told me I should just sign over the house and disappear quietly, that fighting would only make things worse for me, that Derek had resources and connections I couldn't imagine. Then she hung up on me, and when I tried to call back, I discovered she had blocked my number. I sat alone in my cold house, the heat turned down to save money for Derek's inflated rent, and realized both of my children had betrayed me. The daughter I thought was softer and kinder had been working against me all along, probably for months, maybe even helping Derek plan this from the beginning. The pain was beyond anything I could describe, worse than when Thomas died because at least his death wasn't a choice to hurt me. This was intentional, calculated. A conscious decision by two people I had created and raised and loved more than my own life to destroy me for money. I felt like I was dying, like something essential inside me had been ripped out, leaving a bleeding hollow where my heart used to be. Ruth found me that evening, lying on my couch in the dark, staring at the ceiling, tears running silently down my temples into my hair. She had a key I had given her weeks earlier, and she let herself in when I didn't answer her calls. She turned on lights, wrapped me in blankets, made me tea I couldn't taste, and held me while I sobbed out what Pamela had done. Ruth didn't say I told you so or you should have known better. She just held me and let me grieve, understanding that this second betrayal had broken something in me that the first hadn't quite reached. When I finally ran out of tears, Ruth looked at me with fierce eyes and said, "Now we go nuclear. No more mercy. No more chances. They chose this war, and we're going to win it." Ruth called Patricia immediately, explained what had happened, and Patricia actually smiled grimly, saying Pamela's confession about benefiting from the fraud had just made the case even stronger. Patricia accelerated the legal timeline, prepared to file criminal charges within weeks instead of months. The handwriting expert completed the analysis of the forged signatures, providing sworn testimony that they were definitely not mine. The private investigator compiled video evidence from the jewelry store showing Derek using my credit card to buy Bethany's bracelet, footage I hadn't even known existed. Everything was coming together for a confrontation, and Patricia suggested we wait until Christmas, when Derek came for his final eviction attempt, to serve him with criminal charges in front of witnesses, making it impossible for him to intimidate me into dropping everything. 3 weeks before Christmas, on a gray Tuesday afternoon, I came home from the library where I had been researching tenant rights, desperate to understand if Derek could really evict me from my own house. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside to find Bethany standing in my living room with a measuring tape, calmly measuring my windows like she owned the place. She had let herself in with Derek's key, hadn't asked permission, hadn't even called ahead. She looked up when I entered, no guilt or surprise on her face, just cold entitlement as she jotted down measurements in a small notebook. I demanded to know what she was doing in my home, my voice shaking with outrage and fear. Bethany smiled, that same cruel smile she had given me at the grocery store, and said she was planning renovations for when I was gone, measuring for new blinds because mine were tragically dated. She walked through my rooms like a prospective buyer, pointing out what she would change. The walls would be repainted in neutral tones, the carpets ripped out for hardwood floors, my furniture donated or thrown away because it was worthless. She said they planned to rent the house out for $3,000 a month, triple what Derek was charging me, turning a nice profit on their investment property. Every word was designed to hurt, to remind me that I was disposable, temporary, an obstacle to be removed. I followed her through my own house, my shock turning to fury, demanding she leave immediately. Bethany ignored me, continuing her tour, making notes about closet space and bathroom fixtures. Then she delivered her cruelest blow, calling out toward my front door where I suddenly noticed her luxury SUV parked in my driveway. 2 small figures sat in the back seat. Lucas, my 5-year-old grandson who I hadn't seen in 8 months, and baby Emma in her car seat. My heart lurched at the sight of them. Lucas' curly hair so much like Derek's had been at that age, Emma's tiny hands visible through the window. Bethany saw my reaction and weaponized it immediately. She went outside and brought the children in. Lucas walking reluctantly, his hand gripped tightly in Bethany's manicured fingers. I knelt down to his level, tears already streaming down my face, reaching out to hug him. Lucas looked at me with uncertainty, and when I said, "Hi, sweetheart, it's Grandma," he shrank back against Bethany's legs. Bethany had clearly poisoned him against me, telling him God knows what lies about why we didn't see each other anymore. I tried to talk to him, asking about kindergarten and his favorite toys, but he remained silent and fearful. When I reached for baby Emma, Bethany yanked the carrier away from me so hard it startled Emma into crying. Bethany then played her trump card, pulling folded papers from her designer purse and dropping them on my kitchen table. They were quitclaim deed documents, prepared by some lawyer she had hired, ready for my signature. She said if I signed over the house completely, giving up all ownership and rights, they would forgive the debt, drop the eviction, and allow me to see Lucas and Emma occasionally. If I refused, she promised I would never see my grandchildren again, that she would move them across the country if necessary, that she would tell them I was dead before she let me poison them against their father. She gave me 24 hours to decide, then gathered Lucas and Emma and left, her perfume lingering in my house like poison gas. I collapsed after they left, my body simply giving out, sliding down my kitchen cabinets to sit on the floor. I looked at those quitclaim papers, at the lines where my signature was supposed to go, and part of me wanted to sign just to make the pain stop, just to end the constant fear and threats. I thought about Lucas' confused face and Emma's startled crying, and the grief of being turned into a monster in my own grandchildren's minds felt unbearable. I sat there for hours, darkness falling outside, the house growing cold, staring at those papers and wondering if maybe it would be better to just give up, to let them win, to disappear like Bethany wanted. But then I thought about Thomas, about what he would say if he could see what was happening. Thomas had been a fighter, someone who never backed down from what was right even when it was hard. I thought about Ruth and the other women in the support group who had found the courage to fight back against their own abusers. I thought about every patient I had ever cared for who fought through pain and fear to heal. And I realized that signing those papers wouldn't end my suffering. It would just validate everything Derek, Pamela, and Bethany had done, teaching them that cruelty worked, that they could destroy people without consequences. I called Patricia with shaking hands and told her what had happened. Patricia arrived within an hour, took one look at the quitclaim papers, and her expression turned thunderous. She explained that signing would make me homeless with absolutely no recourse, that it would be signing away not just the house, but any legal claim to what had been stolen from me. She spread out documents on my table, showing me the evidence we had gathered over weeks. Bank records, credit statements, handwriting analysis, offshore account information. She reminded me that Derek had already remortgaged my house illegally, that he owed $200,000 on a property worth $180,000, that he was drowning in debt and desperately needed my house to avoid his own bankruptcy. The truth hit me like a lightning bolt. This entire scheme, from the beginning, had been about Derek's financial desperation, not his success. He and Bethany were living far beyond their means, drowning in debt from their luxury lifestyle, and they had chosen to save themselves by destroying me. The rental arrangement had been phase 1, bleeding me for cash while establishing residency claims. The fraudulent credit cards had been phase 2, stealing my identity to fund their lifestyle. Now, forcing me out was phase 3, the endgame where they could sell or refinance the property to cover their debts. They had planned this for years, probably since the day Derek added his name to the deed, and I had been too trusting to see it. Patricia also revealed something I hadn't known. She had been quietly investigating Derek's employment, and he had been fired from Morrison Financial Group 3 months earlier for irregularities in client accounts. Though charges hadn't been filed, Derek was unemployed, surviving on unemployment benefits and Bethany's modest marketing salary, nowhere near enough to maintain their lifestyle. They were desperate, cornered, dangerous, which made them unpredictable but also more likely to make mistakes. Patricia said we needed to move quickly, that Christmas was the perfect time to strike because Derek was so confident in his power over me that he wouldn't see it coming. 2 weeks before Christmas, Ruth invited me to a meeting at her house that would change everything. When I arrived, I found 5 other women sitting in Ruth's cozy living room, ranging in age from 59 to 73, each holding coffee mugs and wearing expressions of understanding that immediately put me at ease. Ruth introduced them as survivors of financial elder abuse, women who had been exploited by family members and fought back successfully. There was Dolores, whose daughter had stolen her retirement savings; Shirley, whose son had forged her name on a reverse mortgage; Caroline, whose grandson had hacked her bank accounts; and 2 sisters, Gladys and Maxine, whose nephew had convinced them to sign over their family farm. Each woman had a story that mirrored mine in heartbreaking ways, and for the first time, I truly understood I wasn't alone in this nightmare. We met 3 times that week, and those women gave me something I desperately needed: proof that fighting back was possible and that survival was real. They shared strategies, warned me about common manipulation tactics my children might try as the legal proceedings advanced, and reminded me constantly that the shame belonged to my abusers, not to me. Dolores had been in recovery for 5 years and had rebuilt her relationship with her other children who hadn't betrayed her. Shirley had successfully sued her son and reclaimed her house. The stories weren't all happy endings. Carolyn's grandson had gone to prison, and she never saw him again. But they were stories of women who chose dignity over being victims, and that mattered more than anything. Meanwhile, Patricia worked with the precision of a surgeon, compiling evidence that would be irrefutable in court. The handwriting expert, Dr. Bernard Klein, had analyzed 15 different signatures Derek had forged on various documents over 2 years, and his sworn affidavit stated with scientific certainty that none of them were mine. He could show the exact differences in pressure, stroke order, and letter formation that proved forgery. This evidence alone could result in multiple felony counts. Patricia also obtained video footage from the Tiffany jewelry store showing Derek presenting my credit card and signing my name on the receipt for Bethany's bracelet. His face clearly visible in the security camera footage, the timestamp matching the transaction exactly. That single video could send him to prison. The private investigator Patricia hired, a former FBI agent named Walter Hayes, had tracked down Derek's offshore account through a series of wire transfers that Derek apparently thought were untraceable. The account, held in a bank in the Cayman Islands under a shell company Derek had created, contained $87,000, almost exactly matching the total he had stolen through fraudulent credit cards and the remainder of Thomas' life insurance payout. Walter had also interviewed the notary whose signature appeared on the fraudulent deed change, and she swore under oath that she had never notarized any document for me, that her notary stamp had been stolen from her office 2 years ago and reported to authorities. This meant Derek had committed notary fraud on top of everything else. Patricia filed a motion to freeze Derek's offshore account, working with federal authorities since the money had crossed international borders. Within days, the account was frozen, meaning Derek suddenly couldn't access what he thought was his hidden safety net. Patricia also contacted the fraudulent credit card companies with our evidence, and they immediately froze those accounts, reversed many of the charges back to the original merchants, and began their own fraud investigations against Derek. The financial noose was tightening around Derek's neck, and he didn't even know it yet because we had done everything quietly, carefully, leaving no trail for Pamela to discover and report back. The house title search revealed exactly what Patricia had suspected. The deed change adding Derek's name had been filed with forged documents and fake notarization, which meant it was completely invalid. I was still the sole legal owner of my house. I had always been the only owner. And every dollar Derek had charged me in rent was obtained through fraud, extortion, and intimidation. Patricia filed paperwork to have the fraudulent deed change officially voided, restoring the public record to show only my name. She also discovered Derek had taken out a home equity line of credit against my house without my knowledge or permission, borrowing $90,000 that he had already spent, putting my house at risk of foreclosure if the payments weren't made. As Christmas approached, Patricia prepared 3 sets of documents: criminal charges to be filed with the district attorney, civil lawsuit papers seeking restitution and damages, and a restraining order to be served simultaneously. She coordinated with Sheriff Mitchell, who she knew from other elder abuse cases, to have officers present when Derek came on Christmas morning for what he thought would be my final eviction. She also contacted a local news reporter, Cynthia Walsh, who had done investigative pieces on elder abuse and was looking for a story with a real victim willing to speak publicly. Cynthia agreed to be there with a camera crew, not to film me without permission, but to document Derek's arrest as part of a larger piece on financial crimes against seniors. I spent those final 2 weeks in a strange state of calm determination, practicing with Ruth what I would say when Derek arrived. Patricia had coached me on staying composed, not engaging with his manipulation, simply stating the truth clearly and waiting for law enforcement to take over. I wrote letters to Lucas and Emma, sealed them in envelopes with instructions to give them when they were 18, explaining what really happened, telling them I loved them, even though their parents had kept us apart. I didn't know if they would ever read those letters, but writing them gave me peace, knowing that someday they might understand their grandmother hadn't abandoned them willingly. The support group women took turns staying with me those final nights, making sure I ate and slept, distracting me with stories and card games, building up my courage for the confrontation. Ruth was there every single day, sometimes just sitting beside me in silence, her presence a reminder that I had people who genuinely cared about me, not for what I could give them but for who I was. On Christmas Eve, Ruth and I baked cookies together, and for a few hours I felt almost normal, almost like the nightmare might actually end, like I might survive after all. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright, sunlight streaming through my kitchen windows as I stood at the counter wearing my best dress, a deep blue one I hadn't worn in years, making cinnamon rolls from Thomas' mother's recipe. The smell filled the house, warm and sweet and nostalgic, reminding me of better Christmases when Derek and Pamela were small and life was simpler. I had set my kitchen table with my good dishes, the ones I usually kept in the cabinet, and placed a small artificial Christmas tree in the corner with lights twinkling cheerfully. If this was going to be my final stand, I wanted it to happen in a space that looked like home, not like the cold battleground it had become. I woke at 5 in the morning, too anxious to sleep, and spent those early hours preparing mentally and physically for what was coming. Ruth was already awake in my guest room, and we ate a quiet breakfast together, not talking much because there wasn't much to say. Patricia had called at 6:30 to confirm everything was in place. Sheriff Mitchell and Deputy Torres were ready, the news crew was on standby, all the paperwork was prepared. She reminded me one more time to stay calm, to let her and the officers handle everything, to remember that I wasn't alone. At 7, Ruth hugged me tightly and then positioned herself in the living room where she could see everything but stay out of the immediate confrontation zone. Derek's car pulled into my driveway at 7:28, and I watched through the window as he, Bethany, and Pamela got out, all three of them dressed casually like they were coming to do manual labor. Derek carried a stack of empty cardboard boxes, Bethany had her phone already out and recording, and Pamela was pulling on work gloves, clearly planning to start packing my belongings immediately. They didn't knock or ring the bell. Derek just used his key to unlock my door like he owned the place, and they walked into my house with the confidence of people who believed they had already won. Derek didn't say good morning or Merry Christmas. He simply headed straight for the kitchen where I stood, his face set in hard lines of determination. Derek stormed into my kitchen and slammed the eviction papers down on the counter with such force that my sugar bowl jumped and scattered white crystals across the surface. His voice was loud, angry, designed to intimidate as he shouted, "Pay the rent or get out. This is my house now." Behind him, Bethany held up her phone, filming with a smile that said she was enjoying this, planning to capture my humiliation for her own entertainment. Pamela immediately started grabbing items from my shelves. A picture frame here, a decorative bowl there, already claiming my belongings as if I had ceased to exist. The noise and aggression was meant to overwhelm me, to make me crumble like I had so many times before, to reinforce that I was powerless against them. But this time was different. I slowly set down the wooden spoon I had been using to frost the cinnamon rolls, wiped my hands carefully on my apron, and looked Derek directly in the eyes for the first time in months without fear. My voice when I spoke was quiet but clear, steady in a way that surprised even me. "I know about the Cayman Islands account, Derek." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't yet exploded, and I watched Derek's face transform in real time. The anger drained away, replaced first by confusion, then shock, then something that looked like genuine fear. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Bethany's phone wavered, and Pamela froze with a vase still in her hands. The silence lasted perhaps 10 seconds, but it felt eternal. Derek's complexion went from flushed with anger to pale as chalk, his eyes darting around like he was looking for an escape route. Finally, he forced out a laugh that sounded hollow and desperate. "What are you talking about?" "You're confused again, Mother." But his voice lacked conviction, and I could see Bethany and Pamela exchanging worried glances. I didn't respond to his deflection. I simply continued, my voice growing stronger with each revelation. "I know you forged my signature on credit cards. I know you stole $87,000. I know you illegally changed the house deed with fake notarization. I know about the home equity line you took out without my permission. I know everything, Derek." Derek's attempt at manipulation kicked in automatically, years of practice making it almost reflexive. He tried to laugh again, waving his hand dismissively, turning to Bethany for support as he said, I was having delusions, that I was becoming senile, that we needed to talk about memory care facilities. Bethany, recovering from her initial shock, lunged toward me trying to grab my phone from the counter, probably thinking the evidence was there. Pamela started moving toward the door, clearly considering whether she should run. The panic in the room was palpable, their carefully constructed plan falling apart in real time as they realized I knew things I wasn't supposed to know. I reached into the oven, where I had hidden a thick folder, and pulled it out calmly. Ruth had suggested the hiding spot, knowing they would never think to look there. I laid the folder on the kitchen table and opened it, revealing bank statements highlighted in yellow, credit card bills with Derek's purchases circled in red, printouts of the offshore account transactions with Derek's shell company name visible, photos of the forged signatures side by side with my real signature showing clear differences. I showed them the handwriting analysis report, the notary's sworn statement, the video still from Tiffany's showing Derek's face clear as day. I displayed each piece of evidence methodically, watching their faces cycle through disbelief, fear, and rage. Derek suddenly lunged forward, trying to grab the documents, desperation making him physical in a way he hadn't been before. I stepped back quickly, and his hand scattered some papers but didn't capture them. His voice was no longer controlled. It was raw and panicked. "Where did you get this? Who helped you? You can't prove any of this." I stayed calm, my voice steady as I replied, "These are copies, Derek. My attorney has the originals, along with sworn statements and video evidence. You can't make this disappear." The word attorney seemed to hit him like a physical blow, and I saw the exact moment he realized this wasn't a confused old woman he could manipulate. This was a serious legal threat he hadn't anticipated. Bethany's scream cut through the tension, shrill and furious, as she shrieked that I was ruining their lives, that I was an ungrateful witch who wanted to destroy her own family. She called me names I won't repeat, her composure completely shattered, revealing the ugliness that had always lurked beneath her polished surface. Pamela, meanwhile, immediately went into self-preservation mode, backing away from Derek and Bethany, her hands up like she was surrendering, claiming loudly that she didn't know anything about the fraud that Derek had lied to her to. The unity between the three of them fractured instantly when faced with real consequences, each one trying to save themselves, showing that their alliance had always been built on greed rather than loyalty. At exactly 8 o'clock, as Derek continued to rage and threaten, my doorbell rang with the specific pattern Patricia had told me to expect. 2 short rings, followed by 1 long one. Derek, Bethany, and Pamela all froze, some instinct telling them that sound meant danger. I walked calmly to my front door and opened it to reveal Sheriff Mitchell, a stocky man in his 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, and Deputy Torres, a younger woman with her hand resting on her duty belt. Behind them stood Patricia, carrying her leather briefcase, and further back near the street was Cynthia Walsh, the reporter with a camera operator, respectfully waiting at a distance, as we had arranged. Derek, seeing the law enforcement officers, immediately switched tactics, his voice becoming smooth and authoritative as he tried to take control of the narrative. He stepped forward with his hand extended like he was greeting business associates, saying, "Officers, thank goodness you're here. My mother is having some kind of mental episode, and she needs help. I've been trying to arrange care for her, but she's becoming delusional and combative." He was so convincing, so practiced at lying, that if I hadn't known the truth I might have believed him myself. Bethany nodded earnestly behind him, playing the concerned daughter-in-law, while Pamela stayed silent, her eyes calculating her best move. Sheriff Mitchell didn't shake Derek's hand. Instead, he stepped fully into my house with Deputy Torres beside him, and his voice was formal and cold as he said, "Derek Hartwell, we're not here for your mother. We're here for you." He pulled out paperwork from his jacket and began reading in an official tone. "You are being charged with multiple counts of identity theft, forgery, wire fraud, elder abuse, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent." Derek's face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally terror as he understood what was happening. He started backing away, shaking his head, saying there must be some mistake, that this was impossible. Deputy Torres moved behind Derek, professional and efficient, pulling out handcuffs as Sheriff Mitchell finished reading the Miranda rights. Derek tried to pull away, his voice rising to a shout. "You can't arrest me! I didn't do anything! She's lying!" She's the criminal here. But his protests meant nothing, as the cold metal clicked around his wrists, the sound impossibly loud in my small kitchen. Bethany screamed, an incoherent sound of rage and panic, and she lunged at me with her perfectly manicured nails extended like claws, her face twisted with hatred. Deputy Torres intercepted her smoothly, restraining her as Bethany shrieked obscenities, calling me every vile name she could think of, spitting in my direction. Sheriff Mitchell turned his attention to Pamela, who had been trying to edge toward the back door, and pulled out a second set of papers. "Pamela Hartwell, you are also being charged as an accessory to fraud and elder abuse. You knowingly benefited from stolen funds and aided in the obstruction of justice." Pamela's face crumpled, and she actually tried to run, bolting for the door like a frightened animal. Sheriff Mitchell caught her easily, his voice patient but firm as he explained that running would only make things worse. Pamela started crying, real tears streaming down her face. But they were tears of fear for herself, not remorse for what she had done to me. She was handcuffed as well, her sobs filling the room. Patricia stepped forward then, her presence commanding despite her average height, and she served Derek and Bethany with civil lawsuit papers, her voice crisp and professional as she outlined the charges, seeking return of all stolen funds totaling $97,000, plus damages for emotional distress calculated at $100,000, legal fees of $35,000, and punitive damages of $120,000. The total sum was $352,000, a number that made Derek's face go even paler if that was possible. Patricia explained that his offshore account had been frozen, his assets would be seized, and if he couldn't pay, his wages would be garnished for the rest of his life. Ruth emerged from the living room then, and behind her came the 5 women from the support group, filing into my kitchen like an army of witnesses. They formed a protective semicircle around me, and Ruth took my hand and squeezed it hard. Their presence was a statement. I wasn't alone. I had people who stood with me, who had survived what I survived, who would testify if needed about the reality of family financial abuse. Dolores stared at Derek with contempt, and Shirley actually told him he should be ashamed, that his mother had given him life, and he had repaid her with cruelty. Their voices, older women who had been where I was, seemed to affect Derek in a way nothing else had, and I saw something that might have been shame flicker across his face before anger replaced it. Derek's breakdown was sudden and complete, the mask of control finally shattering entirely. He fell to his knees, the handcuffs making the movement awkward, and he started begging me to drop the charges, his voice breaking with something that sounded like genuine desperation. He called me Mom for the first time in years, the word foreign and strange coming from his mouth. He claimed he had planned to pay me back, that he had gotten in over his head, that Bethany had pushed him into it, that he was sorry, so sorry. Please forgive him. Tears ran down his face, and for a split second, my heart ached because he looked like the little boy who used to curl up in my lap when he had nightmares. But then Pamela, seeing Derek's strategy, turned on him viciously, her own survival instinct overriding any sibling loyalty. She screamed that Derek had forced her to help him, that he had threatened to ruin her career if she didn't cooperate. Derek's head snapped toward her, his expression murderous, and he shouted back that she had begged for the car, that she had known exactly what was happening and been happy to benefit. The two of them devolved into vicious accusations against each other, each trying to paint the other as the true villain, their bond disintegrating in real time. Sheriff Mitchell had to physically separate them, warning them both to shut up or face additional charges for disturbing the peace. Bethany, meanwhile, had stopped struggling in Deputy Torres' grip, but continued to hurl threats at me, her voice hoarse from screaming. She swore I would never see Lucas or Emma again, that she would tell them I was dead, that she would make sure my name was never spoken in their house. She claimed they had expensive lawyers who would destroy me, that her family had connections I couldn't imagine, that I was a pathetic old woman who had just signed her own death warrant. Her words were meant to terrify me, and months ago they would have, but now they just sounded hollow and desperate. Patricia calmly informed Bethany that part of the legal proceedings included a restraining order preventing any of them from contacting me, and that threats made in front of law enforcement officers were extremely unwise. The perp walk was surreal. Sheriff Mitchell led Derek out first, the handcuffs visible, Derek's head down as he stumbled toward the patrol car. Cameras flashed from the street where neighbors had gathered, drawn by the police presence, witnessing the arrest of the successful businessman who had always seemed so perfect. Deputy Torres brought Pamela out next, and then Bethany, who was still yelling even as she was placed in a separate vehicle. Cynthia Walsh approached respectfully, asking if I would be willing to make a statement. Patricia nodded her approval, and I walked to the edge of my driveway. Ruth beside me, the cold December air sharp in my lungs. My voice surprised me with its steadiness as I spoke to the camera, knowing this would air on the local news, knowing my story would become public. I loved my children with everything I had. I worked 2 jobs, sacrificed everything, to give them good lives and opportunities I never had. They repaid me by stealing my home, my money, my dignity, and trying to erase me from existence. But I'm still here. I survived, and I will not be silent about what happened, because silence protects abusers. If my story helps even one person recognize financial elder abuse and fight back, then this pain will have meaning. My voice cracked slightly on the last words, but I held my head high, refusing to be ashamed of tears that were earned through suffering. The immediate aftermath of Christmas morning felt surreal, like I was moving through water, everything muffled and distant. After the police cars pulled away, after the reporters left, after the neighbors slowly dispersed back to their own holiday celebrations, I collapsed on my couch and simply shook. Ruth stayed with me all day, not asking me to talk or process or feel anything in particular, just sitting beside me holding my hand while I cycled through waves of relief, grief, rage, and exhaustion. The support group women brought food throughout the day, Christmas dinner that appeared magically in my kitchen, and they took turns keeping me company so I was never alone with the enormousness of what had happened. The first month after Derek's arrest was consumed by legal proceedings that felt endless and overwhelming. Derek, Bethany, and Pamela were all formally charged by the district attorney, who took one look at Patricia's evidence and called it one of the most clear-cut cases of financial elder abuse she had seen in 20 years. Derek tried to make bail, but the judge set it at $150,000 based on the severity of charges and flight risk, an amount Derek couldn't come close to paying with his accounts frozen. Bethany's wealthy parents, who I thought might rescue their daughter, refused to help after learning the full extent of what she had done, her mother calling me personally to apologize for not seeing the monster her daughter had become. Pamela's employer fired her immediately when the charges became public, and her marketing career effectively ended before it really started. Patricia worked tirelessly on recovering my stolen funds, and the news was better than I had dared to hope. The offshore account containing $87,000 was seized by federal authorities and would be returned to me after the trial concluded. The credit card companies, now aware of the fraud, reversed the charges and went after Derek for the amounts, meaning my credit report was corrected and I owed nothing on those accounts. The fraudulent home equity line of credit was voided since it had been taken out with forged documents, and the bank that issued it ate the loss rather than pursue me. Patricia filed motions to freeze and seize Derek and Bethany's assets, which included jewelry, electronics, their car, and furnishings, all purchased with stolen money. The sale of those items at auction brought in an additional $15,000 for restitution. Derek's family disintegrated with shocking speed. Bethany filed for divorce from jail, hiring a cutthroat lawyer who painted her as another one of Derek's victims, manipulated by a con artist husband. She moved in with her parents who lived in a gated community 2 hours away, and Lucas and Emma went with her. Social services investigated due to the criminal charges, and while they didn't remove the children, they required supervised visitation for Derek and psychological evaluations for the whole family. Bethany's father, a retired judge, made it clear that Derek was not welcome near his daughter or grandchildren, effectively severing any connection Derek might have maintained. Derek and Bethany's house went into foreclosure. Their cars were repossessed, and every aspect of the luxury life they had built on stolen money crumbled into dust. The trial came 3 months later in March, and I sat in the courtroom surrounded by Ruth, Patricia, and the support group women, watching as Derek faced the consequences of his choices. The evidence was so overwhelming that Derek's public defender advised him to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. Derek stood before the judge, a man I barely recognized, thin and defeated in an orange jumpsuit, and admitted to identity theft, forgery, wire fraud, and elder abuse. The judge, who had been a trauma nurse before going to law school, looked at Derek with undisguised contempt and said she had seen many criminals, but few as coldly calculating as someone who would systematically destroy their own mother. Derek was sentenced to 5 years in prison with possibility of parole after 3, and ordered to pay $95,000 in restitution. Pamela's trial was separate, and she cooperated fully against Derek, testifying about how he had planned the fraud and recruited her to help. Her cooperation earned her a lighter sentence: 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, specifically working with elder abuse prevention organizations, and restitution of $12,000, representing the value of the car Derek bought her with stolen funds. The judge made clear that Pamela's youth and cooperation were the only reasons she avoided prison, but that her betrayal of her mother was morally reprehensible, regardless of legal technicalities. Pamela was also issued a permanent restraining order preventing any contact with me, a condition of her probation that would last 5 years. Bethany's trial was the most contentious because she refused to admit wrongdoing, claiming she had no knowledge of Derek's fraud, despite clear evidence she had worn jewelry and used items purchased with stolen credit cards. Her lawyer argued she was a naive wife who trusted her husband. But the prosecutor showed text messages between Bethany and Derek where they discussed using my credit, where Bethany specifically asked Derek to charge it to your mom when buying luxury goods. The jury found her guilty of conspiracy, and she received 3 years probation, mandatory restitution of $8,000 for items she still possessed, and a lifetime restraining order from me. Her parents were horrified by the verdict, finally accepting that their daughter had known exactly what she was doing. Financial restitution came slowly but steadily over the following year. The seized offshore account funds, $87,000, were released to me after Derek's sentencing, the largest single payment. The sale of Derek and Bethany's possessions brought $15,000. Pamela's payments came in monthly installments of $300, which would take years to complete but was legally binding. Bethany's restitution of $8,000 came from her parents, who paid it all at once, just to be done with the humiliation. In total, I recovered $110,000, more than I had lost when the home equity line cancellation was included. For the first time in 3 years, I had financial security again. My new life began slowly, tentatively, like learning to walk after an injury. I used some of the restitution money to pay off the small debts I had accumulated during the worst of Derek's abuse, buying myself breathing room. I refinanced my house properly, in my name only, lowering the monthly payment to something comfortable. I started volunteering at the county's Elder Abuse Prevention Center, working with Patricia to help other victims find resources and courage. I became a speaker at community events, sharing my story to help people recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation. Standing in front of groups of strangers and saying out loud what had happened to me was terrifying at first, but it became empowering, transforming my shame into purpose. Ruth's friendship became the foundation of my recovery, more valuable than any amount of money. We traveled together for the first time in my life, taking a bus tour to Washington, D.C. to see the monuments I had only read about. We attended the support group every week, and I watched new victims arrive, scared and broken like I had been, and I helped them see that survival was possible. Ruth reminded me constantly that I was worthy of love and respect, that Derek's betrayal said everything about him and nothing about me. We celebrated every small victory. My first full night of sleep without nightmares. My first meal where food tasted like something other than cardboard. My first day where Derek didn't occupy every thought. An unexpected ally appeared 6 months after the trial when Thomas' brother, Uncle Raymond, reached out after reading about the case in the newspaper. Raymond was 68, a retired electrician who had been estranged from our family for years after a falling out with Thomas I never fully understood. He called me, his voice gruff with emotion, and apologized for not being there when Thomas died, for not checking on Derek and Pamela as they grew up, for not being present when I needed family. We met for coffee. Awkward at first, but slowly rebuilt a connection. Raymond and his wife Geneva became part of my support system, joining Ruth and me for holiday dinners, treating me like the family I had always deserved. The question of Lucas and Emma haunted me for months, a wound that wouldn't fully heal. Social services contacted me after Bethany's parents expressed concerns about their ability to care for 2 young children long-term, asking if I would be willing to take custody of my grandchildren. It was an impossible decision that kept me awake for nights, my heart and my head at war. I desperately wanted to know Lucas and Emma, to be their grandmother, to give them the love their parents were incapable of providing. But I had to be honest with myself. At 55, with chronic back pain and limited income, could I physically care for a 6-year-old and a toddler? Could I be what they needed? And more painfully, how could I look at their faces every day without seeing Derek and Bethany, without the trauma flooding back? After counseling with a therapist Patricia recommended, I made the agonizing decision to decline custody. I couldn't care for young children properly, physically or emotionally. I feared that my association with their parents' crimes would traumatize them further, that they would grow up confused about why Grandma helped put Daddy in prison. Instead, I agreed to supervised visitation through social services, meeting Lucas and Emma twice a month at a neutral location with a social worker present. The visits were stilted and strange at first. Lucas remembered me as a scary person from Bethany's stories, but slowly he began to relax, to accept my gifts and hugs. Emma was too young to remember anything, and to her I was just another adult who brought toys and read stories. Lucas and Emma were eventually placed together with a foster family who expressed interest in adoption, a couple in their 30s with a stable home and genuine love to offer. I met them during a transition visit, and I saw immediately that these were good people who would give my grandchildren the life they deserved. I made a decision that Patricia helped me formalize legally. I created a trust fund from the restitution money, setting aside $50,000 specifically for Lucas and Emma's college education, untouchable until they turned 18. It was the only gift I could give them. Knowing I couldn't be their parent but refusing to let them suffer financially for their parents' crimes, I also wrote long letters to Lucas and Emma, separate ones for each, sealed in envelopes with instructions to be given to them when they turned 18. I explained everything. What really happened, why I had to prosecute their father, how much I loved them despite our separation, how none of this was their fault. I told them about Thomas, their grandfather who would have adored them, about the kind of man he was and the values he taught. I told them about the good parts of Derek and Pamela as children, before greed twisted them, so they could know their family history wasn't entirely darkness. I don't know if they'll ever read those letters, if they'll want to know me when they're adults, but I put my truth in writing, so they have the option to understand someday. Derek wrote to me every month from prison, and I received those letters with a mixture of dread and morbid curiosity. The first letters were full of blame, claiming I had overreacted, that I was vindictive and cruel, that a real mother would have forgiven him. I threw those away without finishing them. The later letters showed slight awareness, acknowledging he had made mistakes, though he framed them as errors in judgment rather than calculated cruelty. Eventually, after about 18 months, I received a letter where Derek actually apologized, saying therapy in prison had helped him see the harm he caused, that he was sorry for the pain and betrayal. The apology felt partial, incomplete, still containing justifications and excuses, but it was more than I expected. I never responded to any of his letters, not out of cruelty but because I had nothing left to say to him. Derek had made his choices, and now he was living with consequences that were entirely his responsibility. Pamela attempted reconciliation after her probation ended, sending flowers to my house with a card that said, "I'm different now, can we talk?" She followed up with a long email explaining she had been in therapy, that she understood the magnitude of her betrayal, that she wanted to make amends properly. I read her words carefully, looking for genuine remorse, and I found something that resembled it, though mixed with self-pity and excuses about youth and Derek's influence. After discussing it with my therapist and Ruth, I agreed to meet Pamela once in a coffee shop, a public neutral location where I felt safe. Pamela cried, apologized, explained how she had been desperate for Derek's approval and made terrible choices. I listened, and then I told her I forgave her, because carrying hatred was poisoning me more than her. But I also told her that forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation, that some betrayals cut too deep to ever fully repair. We parted cordially but not warmly, and we haven't spoken since. Some relationships, once broken, simply cannot be remade. 1 year after that devastating Christmas morning, I hosted a holiday gathering at my house, and the transformation was complete. My home was filled with Ruth and the support group women, with Uncle Raymond and Geneva, with Patricia, who had become a friend beyond being my attorney, with volunteers from the Elder Abuse Center who wanted to celebrate with the woman whose story had inspired them. We made cinnamon rolls together, Thomas' mother's recipe, and the kitchen was full of laughter and warmth and the kind of family I had always deserved. I wore a red sweater Ruth had given me, and I smiled genuinely, feeling joy that wasn't clouded by fear or obligation. This was chosen family, people who loved me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. That evening, I sat by my living room window watching snow fall, the street outside peaceful and quiet, Christmas lights twinkling on neighbors' houses. I thought about how far I had traveled in 12 months, from a terrified woman cowering in her own kitchen to someone who stood up in courtrooms and at community events to tell her truth. I thought about the girl I had been, nursing student full of dreams, and the woman I had become, a survivor who turned her pain into purpose. I thought about Thomas and wondered what he would say about everything that happened. The lesson I learned through all of this was both simple and profound. I was stronger than I ever knew. For 2 years, Derek had convinced me I was weak, confused, worthless. a burden to be tolerated rather than a person to be valued. But when I finally found my voice, when I finally chose to trust myself over his manipulation, I discovered reserves of courage I didn't know existed. I learned that family isn't just biology. It's the people who show up when you're broken and help you rebuild. I learned that my worth was never determined by how Derek and Pamela treated me, that their cruelty was a reflection of their character, not my value. I learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, that I could release the poison of hatred without allowing abusers back into my life. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to fight back, that no matter your age or circumstances, you deserve dignity and safety and love. On New Year's Eve, as midnight approached, Ruth and I sat on my couch with mugs of hot chocolate, watching the countdown on television. When the clock struck 12, Ruth raised her mug in a toast, and I clinked mine against hers. She said, "To survival and strength." And I added, "To second chances and chosen family." We drank to those words, and then I thought of one more toast, just for myself, spoken quietly, to Margaret Hartwell, 55 years old, who learned she was worth saving. I thought about Christmas morning 1 year ago, about standing in my kitchen when Derek shouted those terrible words, about finding my voice and saying what needed to be said. I whispered to my reflection in the darkened window, "I survived this. I'm still here, and am finally free." Financial elder abuse affects millions of people every year, often perpetrated by the family members victims trust most. If you or someone you know is being exploited financially, manipulated, or controlled by relatives demanding money or access to assets, please know you're not alone, and it's not your fault. Speaking up is the first step to freedom. You are not stupid, crazy, or worthless. You deserve dignity, safety, and love. It's never too late to fight back, to reclaim your life, to choose yourself. Your story matters, and you matter, more than any amount of money or any person who treats you otherwise. Now I want to hear from you. Have you or someone you love experienced financial abuse from family members? How did you find the courage to speak up? Or what's holding you back from getting help? Share your story or thoughts in the comments below, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to take that first step toward freedom. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more stories of survival, strength, and second chances. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that fighting back is possible and that they're worthy of protection. Thank you for being here with me today, for listening to my story without judgment, for being part of a community that believes survivors and supports healing. I wish you all peace, safety, and the courage to choose yourself when no one else will. Remember, you are never too old, too tired, or too broken to reclaim your life. Merry Christmas, and may this year bring you the family you deserve, whether that's the one you were born into or the one you build yourself.